When Jesus showed his disciples the value of eating together, do you think he had vestments and power structures in mind? Definitely not. So why do we? Hi, I'm Drew, and this is Faith 15. Today, we're talking about communion. So I suppose we should start at the beginning, right? What is communion? Now, the practice we know as Holy Communion seems to go all the way back to the beginning. But we shouldn't pretend it looks like it does now, right? Not then. Early Christians seemed to gather for meals with real food. And this idea jives with the moment we all look to in the Bible for answers about communion, the Last Supper. Now, we have 4 accounts of it, and yet in none of them does Jesus suggest that the disciples keep up the practice. Now, Matthew, it says, while they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never again drink of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." So in most communion services, the presider says words very close to the ones we just read in Matthew, in which Jesus breaks bread and invites them to eat. Then he shares a cup of wine and invites them to drink. Right? We often call this the words of institution. So at the most basic level, Christians are sharing in a practice we've always shared in, right? But how that plays out flies in a million different directions, only 2 of which we're even going to entertain today. Now, if you know anything about the difference between Catholics and Protestants, you probably know the 50-cent word transubstantiation, or that Catholics supposedly think that piece of styrofoam turns into Jesus. And Protestants, on the other hand, are like, nah, man, that isn't really Jesus. I know I'm oversimplifying. I only have 5 minutes. A big part of why there's a fight here has nothing to do with any deep theological convictions. It's about philosophy and power. Not so much what happens, but to what that happening is happening, right? And who gets to make it all happen. So Protestants are all, since nothing's changing literally, anybody can do it. It's just a family reunion, which is honestly a lot closer to what Jesus actually said. Meanwhile, Catholics are all, dude, no, something happens. And to make sure we all can test and verify that junk, that presider has to be verified. Literally, a bishop has to put his hands on that person so we can tie this all the way back to the disciples. And some of us are going, you both sound like nails on a chalkboard right now. Now, the other thing that this brings us to is the second problem. What counts? There are 1,000,001 ways to process this, right? So let me take a stab at one of them. Most people don't really care about the theology, at least not the heady abstract construct we call theology. They care about what it all boils down to, and therefore what counts. Just tell me what to believe, okay? And the version of what counts that they are most comfortable with is that big room with the fancy stuff. It is easiest to verify and call legitimate when we're in that space. In other words, the fundamental question is, where is the authority to count this gathering of ours as real communion? Another simplification of the Catholic-Protestant divide is to argue over where the authority to name what counts comes from. Hierarchical churches say it comes from the top, while congregational institutions say it comes from the bottom. So for some, authority is simply what the bishop says, and for others, it's wherever some people say it is, which is its whole other ball of wax. But notice how far these conversations have gotten us from what Jesus was actually doing with his followers, and how far we've gotten from what those first followers did without him. He ate and told them to remember him when they ate. And they ate together to remember him. They ate dinners. They gathered together regularly. But most importantly, they ate. At its heart, communion is about communing with God and with one another. It transcends our institutional boundaries and our individual desires. It is an act of rebellion against a stubborn faith and an act of radical inclusion that we might know Jesus in the breaking of bread. In other words, every vision we have for the Eucharist is too small. Peace be with you. We'll see you next time.